Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session, Open Algorithms, Lessons Learned from the Open Data Movement. My name is Natalia Domagala, and I currently work at the Central Digital and Data Office in the UK.
And my name is Soizic Penicaud, and I work for ETALAB, which is the French government's task force for open data and data policy.
My name is Simon Chignard, and I'm working at ETALAB as a senior policy advisor.
As practitioners in the UK and France, we've observed that there are many similarities between open data and the emerging open algorithms movement. And our goal in this paper and in this presentation was to analyze the key challenges and lessons from the open data movement to provide practical recommendations that would be useful for policymakers and policy practitioners working in the open algorithms movement. And it's important to flag that one limitation of this work is that as practitioners in the UK and France, we are mostly using examples from our work, which means that the geographical scope of this paper is very narrow and not representative of other locations and cultural contexts.
Let's start with two pictures. And the first one was taken in 2009 at a TED conference, and Sir Tim Berners-Lee gave a talk about the next web. And during his presentation, he invited the audience to join him to call for raw data now. And it was seen as a founding moment for the open data movement back then. In the summer 2020, that's the other picture that you can see on the slide. This is a picture taken in London, and this is a student protesting in front of the Department of Education building. And they were protesting against a system, an algorithm, and the writing sound was fuck the algorithm. And we can see here what we thought is our two founding moments, the first of the open data movement and the second of the open algorithm movement. Of course, a lot has changed during the 12 years between these two events. First, the political climate has changed, and maybe not for the good. The open data movement gained traction at the international and national level, but we as open data practitioners, we also learned a lot about the limitation and pitfalls also of these approaches to transparency and accountability. And what we'd like to do here and today is to see how these lessons, how what we learn from the open data movement could be useful for the quite new algorithmic transparency movement. At least three questions emerge. The first one is, which algorithm should we publish first? The second one is, what impact can we expect from this openness, from this increased transparency? And last but not least, who are the targets of these initiatives?
And what we'll do in this presentation is focus on three challenges. And for every challenge, we will draw from our experience as practitioners. And then we will propose some recommendations right after each challenge. The first challenge we want to start with is one that is at the core of the open algorithms movement, and it is why. Why are we doing this? So the picture you see on this slide is a picture taken during a workshop, one of the workshops that we conducted in France with public servants developing and overseeing algorithms, so policymakers, data scientists, project managers. And one of the findings we've had as practitioners is that public servants tend to self-exclude, so non-technical public servants tend to self-exclude from the discussion if they're shown too much information about the algorithm, and if it seems too technical to them. And we feel like it is closely tied to a question that was present at the beginning of the open data movement, which relied on a build it and they will come approach without putting the end goal, which was reuses at the heart of the issue, and which meant that a lot of effort to open data didn't lead to anything. And here it's the same thing. It's a lot of effort to make algorithms transparent, risks not leading to anything. So for open algorithms, we've identified at least 2 goals for practitioners. The first one is government accountability, which means enabling citizens and civil society to exert their rights and to hold policymakers accountable for the decisions in place. And the second one is quality of public service delivery, meaning enabling public servants to still be in charge and to still understand the decisions they will make using their expertise, even when they use algorithms as part of their decisions.
As Soizic told us just now, there is no easy connection between the theoretical availability of information and its uptake as knowledge. And with an overwhelming number of various data sets with often irrelevant or impenetrable information, there is a risk of transparency becoming a burden that the members of the public are not able to bear. So we should reconsider what forms of transparency would be the most effective in facilitating understanding and reducing this burden on the general public. And the challenge of achieving meaningful transparency becomes a challenge of building trust rather than visibility. In terms of what meaningful transparency actually means, a definition provided by Safak and Parker says that providing the public with the necessary tools and information to assess and interact with algorithmic decision-making systems as public services. And what this means in practical terms is that amplifying existing mechanisms that keep public services in check and making information available to the public with the authentic intention of engaging them in decision-making process is what this meaningful transparency should be. So based on this definition and other studies on meaningful transparency, in this work, we would like to recommend that policymakers striving to achieve meaningful transparency in the use of algorithms facilitating decisions in the public sector should begin their work with 2 main questions. Firstly, what is the goal of releasing information about the use of algorithmic systems in decision-making? And secondly, who is this transparency for? To improve our comprehension of the target audience and to help us consider how this burden of understanding can be reduced effectively. And this could be achieved through creating opportunities for public participation in policymaking and working with the public to define their needs in terms of the specification of the systems that need to be made transparent, the type of information that should be delivered, and the format in which this information should be presented. And what you can see on the screen here is a screenshot from a recent deliberative engagement process that we've run in the UK. And we aim to explore which algorithmic transparency measures would be most effective at increasing public trust and public understanding about the use of algorithms. And here, using a deliberative process enabled participants to gradually build up their knowledge, form their opinions about algorithms used in the public sector, and share their experience on the topic, and finally express their expectations for transparency. And in the very final stage of this project, researchers worked collaboratively with participants to develop a prototype standard for algorithmic transparency that reflected the needs and expectations of algorithms in the public sector. And similarly, there are other excellent deliberative initiatives done by the member countries of the Open Government Partnership Group on open algorithms, for example, in New Zealand. And in this paper, we recommend scaling up the use of deliberative methods in algorithmic transparency policies and strengthening global collaboration on the topic so we can all work together to facilitate knowledge exchange and jointly tackle common challenges.
So the second challenge we've identified is that of impact and impact measurement. And Natalia just mentioned public engagement, but I just want to go back to public servants for a minute. And I will read you a quote from a public servant that was said during a webinar on algorithm registers, where this person gave an account of their method to inventory the different algorithms in their agency. So this person said, when we asked the agencies if they were using algorithms in their decisions, a lot of them immediately dismissed the question, saying, we don't have algorithms, we don't have super machines that will give you a result from super entry data. And that is a direct quote, super entry data. Instead, we asked them, so the public servant in question, That's not what I'm asking you. What I'm asking is, do you have procedures that are systematic enough so that data that is entered into this procedure gives a result that leads to an administrative decision? And that was our greatest difficulty. So we see here that there's a problem with definition of the things that we're trying to make more transparent and more open. And there is a lack of algorithmic literacy among public servants who, on the side, already work in resource scarce environments and who don't necessarily have time to take care of these topics. And this is important in terms of impact, because it means that if they don't have an understanding of the end goal, we might miss very important algorithms that should be made known to the public, because and we might miss them because they don't exactly fit the picture that these public servants had in mind, and they don't even realize that they're using algorithms to support a decision, for example. And what this illustrates is both the need to raise awareness about algorithms are in the public sector, but also maybe change the focus from the tool, algorithms, to the endpoint, which is decisions, so that we adapt our language to the way public servants already work. And I'm focusing on public servants because it's something that's oftentimes overlooked. And as practitioners, we see it very, very often. But of course, the same goes for how we reach out and spread awareness among the public, as Natalia will probably detail in a moment.
So here, a crucial lesson from the open data movement that we would like to recommend is to capture, evaluate, and disseminate various accounts that would demonstrate the significance of proactive algorithmic transparency measures, and encourage other public sector entities to adopt them. So the more positive examples we have for algorithmic transparency initiatives and how they drive impact on the ground, the more organizations around the world will follow and various algorithmic transparency measures. And we've seen this in the open data movement. We've seen how powerful those examples and success stories can be. And this is what we need to work on now in the open algorithms movement. And in addition, this emphasis on increasing positive impact also implies engaging the public to support the capacity and community building efforts, and increase algorithmic and technical literacy amongst the public, but also, as Soizic said, amongst the public sector workers. And one example of how this could be done is what you can see on the screen here. And this is the work of Stojanovic, Sloan, and Arif Khan, who created a series of comics to provide a new understanding of artificial intelligence and its impact on daily life. And these kind of initiatives, very playful, very engaging, could be useful to raise this awareness and increase algorithmic literacy in amongst the general public, but also public servants. And other ways of doing that could include adding algorithmic transparency modules to various internal public sector trainings, or running workshops or teaching sessions for our colleagues, which is what we also recommend.
And speaking of literacy and technical things, the third challenge that we want to point out, third and final challenge, is that of quality. So what you can see on the screen here is the release of the source code for APB, which was the French higher education application system. And so in 2016, the French Ministry of Education required the source code to be released, and they released it, but as scanned PDF files, which made it impossible for developers and data scientists to check the coherence between the code and the law the code was supposed to implement, which was the initial objective of the opening of the source code. And thankfully, I will mention that efforts have been made since, and we have made some progress. But this is reminiscent of the open data movement and its beginning call 10 years ago of opening everything, regardless of the quality of the data. So similar things can happen in the open algorithm movement. And one last thing we wanted to point out with regards to quality is that despite this example being focused on the openness of source code, transparency of algorithms should definitely not be limited to technical transparency. and Natalia will give examples of that.
As we've learned from the open data movement, in order to increase the quality of information gathered through various algorithmic transparency measures, we recommend three things. So firstly, prioritizing what algorithmic systems should be made transparent in the first instance, then providing clear definitions of which systems are classified as algorithms for the needs of this transparency reporting, and finally, considering development and deployment of unified standards to present this information. As we've mentioned earlier, and as we've learned from this open everything approach in the open data movement, there might be a need to prioritize if we want to maintain high quality of the information that we are releasing. So governments should identify the highest impact algorithms that would be prioritized when introducing algorithmic transparency measures. Also, the challenge of determining what algorithmic models should be in scope is needs a very comprehensive review of the existing uses of algorithms and AI in the public sector, and perhaps extensive consultations with external experts as well, because it is a really big issue. And some of the existing definitions, for example, from Canada or from the New York City, could provide a helpful starting point for other public sector bodies grappling with these issues. And in terms of standards, currently there are no global standards for algorithmic transparency. But there have been various attempts to identify the categories of information that should be prioritized. And what you can see here on the screen is an example from the cities of Helsinki and Amsterdam. And those cities adopted a standardized approach developed by a Finnish company, Sided. And the following categories of information have been made available: data sets, data processing, non-discrimination, human oversight, and risk management. And in addition, there is a designated accountability section that provides details on the department where the algorithm is being used, responsible organizations, and the contact details and any external parties involved. And this issue of categories and prioritization of information that should be made publicly available has also been raised in some of the work that we've done in the UK. So in the report that I mentioned previously, one of the recommendations that we got through our public engagement was that we should have a tier 2 system to present this information. So tier 1 should contain basic information about the purpose and description of the algorithm, and it should be very simple, written plain English, immediately available to anyone. And tier 2 would cover all the remaining aspects, such as data privacy considerations, human oversight, risks, impact, technicalities, commercial information, and should be easily accessible for those willing to find out more. But it won't immediately overwhelm the people looking at this information.
And to end this presentation of our paper, I would like to share with you at least three conclusions. The first one is, of course, we should recognize and even acknowledge the limitation of transparency and openness. We are strong believer of transparency and openness, but still we should not be naive about the impact of transparency, about the fact that sometimes some algorithms should not be built in first. And the question is not so much about making them more transparent. And second, and that's linked to the first conclusion actually, the second conclusion is to say, we need to be more aware, we need to rethink the power structure in which this system, these algorithmic systems operate. And we had a lot of experiences about that, about understanding not only the technical system, or not only focusing on the question of data and technical details and so on, but also maybe to have a broader approach about the power structure and how it fits, how the system fits in this structure. And last but not least, we would like to invite researchers to focus on that question of implementation of algorithmic transparency. We need to better understand how practitioners in the administration, but also sometimes in the private sector, can implement these principles of algorithmic transparency. And we also need to understand how it impacts really not only the systems of the administration or the public service, but also citizens and society as a whole. And to say a few words, I'm quite sure that Soizic, Natalia, and I will be glad to open the discussion and to have a discussion with you about our research and our recommendation during our session in the next Data for Policy Conference 2021. Thank you, everyone.